Okay, recording is in progress. Couple things. Just want to remind people, if you enjoy these videos, please like and subscribe to both my page and Devon's page. I'll put links down in the show description. I'm going to try not to yell too much. Some people said that during the cake video, I got a little too upset about buttercream icing. So I'm going to try and calm down a little. And besides getting you to like and subscribe, if you enjoy these videos, I also want to make an announcement that I am starting to do some online personal training consultations. This is not just only with clients, but also with other personal trainers. So for information on that, I'll also put my contact information in the show notes. Devon, is there anything you want to pimp before we get started?
I can't think of anything right now. If I
think you think of anything at any point during the video, please feel free. It's like how you have a wild card when you play poker, right? Poker's wild. Well, you can feel free to pimp products or anything you're doing at any point during the video. Okay. Well, let's get down to the topic here, and it's something you had brought up, is what do you do not only just as a personal trainer, but say as an average everyday person trying to lose weight, get in shape? What do you do once you get bored? And I wanted some, and since you brought it up, Devon, I'd like to hear some of your insights on that. Not just, when it's happened to people, but ways you help people overcome this. Why is boredom an issue, and how do you help people overcome that?
I mean, I would say if for a beginner, usually they're bored because they're not making progress, and they're not making progress because they're chasing a lot of variety and novelty in their workouts. And because they're doing that, they're not really able to progress. Makes it a lot harder.
Why would using so much variety make it hard for a beginner to progress?
Because you're not really improving the skill of one thing in particular. So it's harder to increase the load of that exercise that you're doing. And that's really what's going to make the biggest impact on if someone's chasing like body composition changes. Really that what they want to do is get stronger. But if they're chasing so much variety, they're not going to be able to improve the skill of any one thing in order to actually lift heavier to make the change. And then if they don't make the change, then they don't see progress, and they don't see progress and they stay bored. And then they kind of stay stuck in this cycle of chasing novelty and being bored because they're not making progress.
Right. I can give you a perfect real life example. When I made my bar mitzvah when I was in my early 40s, one of the things we did was we studied Hebrew. And even within the Hebrew, we studied the same prayer, the same letters. We didn't go like in a class one day and study Hebrew and the next day start studying Italian because there's Italian Jews, and then start studying Arabic because there's Arabic Jews, and then start studying French because there's Jews in France, right? Even though that you could argue, that's my Devon alarm, excuse me, even though we could argue that there may be some reason to go down those other roads, it would be impossible to get better at a new thing, especially when you're older and it's harder to learn new things, if you're constantly all over the place. If you want to learn French, you don't do yourself any favors by studying French on Monday and then Spanish on Tuesday and then German on Wednesday and then Chinese on Thursday and then going back to French on Friday. You want that consistency. And I think that becomes even more important as we get older and our brains become a little less flexible. Right? We need that. For kids, I think they need the repetitiveness to build the discipline. For adults, we just simply don't have the ability to be that widely varied. We need that consistency to learn, like you said, because there is a skill component to these exercises. There's a skill component to cooking. There's a skill component to conditioning yourself to live in the world's most obesogenic society in history and be able to still do the things you need to do to stay in a calorie deficit. So great, good. So beginners, they get themselves in trouble because they want too much variety. They want too much mobility. No, not mobility, not nobility. Too much. What's the word I'm looking for, Devon?
Novelty.
Novelty. There you go. Can't get words anymore. All right. What else? What other thoughts do you have on this idea of boredom?
Well, I think too, once people get over that beginner phase and they just get to the point where it's more routine, like they come in for their workouts, they're lifting weight, they're getting stronger, or maybe they're getting to that intermediate phase where they're not going to get stronger with every workout or every week or every month. And then they hit a point where it's like, okay, I'm doing all these things, but like, is it actually working? And I think that's that's a time where it becomes even more important, not even more important, but it's still just as important to stay consistent and keep doing those basic things, because those are the very things that got them to that intermediate level in the first place. So to continue doing those, and I think just knowing that that's the reality of the process, is they are going to get to a point where progress is going to get slower. They're still going to have to be repeating a lot of the same basic things, and it's just going to have to become, or just keep staying part of their normal routine, in order to keep making progress.
But just so everyone knows, I'm not over here doing my quarterly taxes. These are my Devon notes, okay? So people out there understand I'm dating myself here a little bit. There used to be a commercial back in the 80s about a financial company called E.F. Hutton, I believe it was. And they always said when E.F. Hutton talks, people listen. So guys, when Devon talks, I listen and I take notes and I write things down. So just so people don't think I'm getting distracted over here, and I'm working on something else. One of the things that you hit on, though, I think is very important, is that as people get towards that intermediate level, you're simply not going to see what is considered noticeable progress in terms of reps or weight added onto the machine, the bar, the dumbbell, every workout. That is not a sign of a lack of progress. It's the exact opposite. We've talked about this a lot of times. I first learned of this phrase from Lyle McDonald, this idea of this asymptote. The idea that when you start out, your progress is like this. But as you get closer and closer to your potential, that line begins, you can almost use the top of my screen as your maximum potential. As you get closer and closer to that, things start to slow down a little bit. And you start seeing yourself put a lot more work in to get less and less progress in terms of rate of development. And that's actually a sign that you've arrived. That's a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Mm-hmm. I think it's important to say that while for beginners, almost every workout or every other workout, they could add reps or add sets or add weight or add complexity to the movement. For an intermediate, you may go 3 to 4 weeks where an exercise is still going to be an adequate stimulus, where you're going to be using a weight, which for 3 to 4 weeks is doing enough to help the muscle adapt. It's just you're at that intermediate phase, so things are starting to level off. I think one of the problems in how people oftentimes get hurt is they think that the intermediate, what got them there, is going to get them to the next level. Whereas with the intermediate, you just don't see that constant line of progress. You progress, but it's a lot more work to get less of a distance. And you may spend, it's almost like plateaus and then raises. Whereas a beginner, it's like a straight up shot. With intermediates, it kind of goes like this, and then it goes like that, then this, then that, then this. Yeah. So that's a good motivational thing to know. You may have went from 5 to 10s to 15s to 20s to 25s in the incline dumbbell press, and all of a sudden you're at 25s for a month. That's not a lack of progress. That's a sign that now you're probably an intermediate lifter, and you may spend about a month at those 25-pound dumbbells before you go to the 27.5s, right? That's the other thing. It's like you spend a lot longer time to make a lot less of a jump. But what people understand is that's what makes elite level athletes. If progress went this way, everyone would be bench pressing 500 pounds in a year, right? What happens in elite level athletes is they're no more or less blessed in this department. They just start here. So when they do their linear progression as beginners, they end up at a higher plateau than most people when they get to the intermediate level. But advanced lifters are still stuck, unless they do massive amounts of drugs, are still stuck at that same limits of human existence. Right? They have to stay at a stimulus for a while, then raise, and stay at the stimulus for a while, then raise. So that's a very important thing. Sometimes that can really demotivate people and make them bored because they're not making the same progress they made as beginners.
Yeah.
Exactly. The human body is doing exactly what it's supposed to do.
Right.
Right. Right. So one other thing I thought was kind of interesting, because he kind of took that away from me. I had written that down before we started, and I was going to say that. So thanks, Devon. That's called stealing a person's thunder without doing it intentionally. I think another thing two things I want to say about boredom is I think it's a good thing. Boredom's good. Boredom, okay. This is an inside joke. Don't even ask. Getting bored. You want to be bored doing the same thing. What's that?
Boredom's important.
Boredom's important. Hey, I don't know what that's about. Important things are good. You just lost some people with the inside joke there, but it's okay. I think the thing is, people think you got to be excited about stuff all the time. And most progress is made by doing very unexciting things all the time. Like if you look at our personal training businesses, how many times is it exciting to return an email to a client about an appointment time? It's not the most exciting thing we do, right? The most exciting thing we do is to see, like I had a client today doing an exercise, a very advanced version of a single leg deadlift, and it's called a windmill, in which you literally are balancing on one leg while bent over at 90 degrees. And then your hands are out to the side and literally you're rotating your body about that much, but you can't use your spine. You got to use your hips. And it's a lot of work just to move that far, but my toes are curling in my shoes and I'm dancing on the gym floor and I'm bouncing on my ball. All right, that's the exciting part of what I do for a living. But what led up to that point was 1,000 things that the person does every day, day in, day out. Most progress is made. Most of your big rocks, as I know you've used the analogy before, are some of the most boring possible things you could do, right? You go to the dentist and you get a cleaning and you walk out of there and you feel fantastic. The reason why you walk out of there and feel fantastic and not with a diagnosis of gingivitis is the 1,000 other times you brushed your teeth before you made it to that 6-month appointment, right? No one's going to say that flossing your teeth is exciting and sexy, but it's something you got to do every day to get the end result at the 6 months where your dentist says, oh, you have no cavities. So I think there's a detraction from boredom when boredom seems to be the exact, you know you're doing the right things when they get a little bored. When I meet people who are excited about 11 different types of sea salt, I know the person is on the wrong track. I ate vegetables today. Isn't that amazing? It's like, no, it's called Wednesday. And I don't mean to burst people's bubble, but the reality is you know you've arrived at diet and exercise when you're not getting excited about these things because they're now part of your everyday existence. I don't get excited about putting my seatbelt on because I don't have major psychological issues. I got them, but they're not major, right? So it's you do these things every day in and day out, and it's actually good that you're bored because that's where most of your progress is made, in the stuff that isn't sexy and isn't exciting. It's the million little things that make the big, sexy, exciting stuff possible. Mm-hmm. And the other thing I think that people have to hit on is, I think where people get bored with diet is they still have this old idea of there's off-limit foods, that there's certain foods that are diet foods and there's certain foods that aren't diet foods. And even within the diet food, like take chicken, for example. The other day you made this awesome air fryer recipe, the Cajun chicken the chicken thighs in the air fryer. Am I remembering that? I'm like hallucinating. Okay. Some people look at chicken breast and say only chicken breast is the only form of chicken that is a diet food and everything else is a non-diet food. And the nutritional difference between a boneless, skinless chicken thigh and a chicken breast is not as big as most people would believe. But I will tell you, the flavor difference is incredible, right? And it's juicier and it stays more, I know this word upsets people, it stays more moist when you cook it, right? So even within like certain diet foods, like with their categorization of diet foods, chicken, there's even only certain types of chicken to eat. Whereas one of the best things people can do, the most convenient things, if you have a Costco membership, go buy yourself a damn roasted chicken. Go buy some of those. Don't buy a regular roasted chicken, buy a damn roasted chicken. Buy some of those little chicken skewers that they make. You know, there's some variety right there. You're still eating your chicken. You're still getting your protein numbers in, 0.5 to 0.75 grams per day. If you've got a lot of weight to lose, 0.75 to 1.0 grams per day per pound of body weight. If you don't have a lot of weight to lose, because your body is now going to start hemorrhaging muscle in place of the fat that no longer exists. That's boring. That's not sexy. Doing that every day, day in and day out, is not the most exciting thing to do, but it's the necessary foundation to maintain muscle and manage hunger while on a low-calorie diet. So you can go in there and you can try different variations of the same food or try different cuts of meat and just prepare them in ways. Don't deep fry, bone-in, skin-on chicken thighs. But if you go check out Devon's page, you just basically, you season a bunch of chicken thighs, boneless, skinless, with some Cajun seasoning, and you put it in the air fryer.
Yeah.
It looks like something of a damn restaurant. Again, not a restaurant, a damn restaurant. It looked amazing, right? So I think people get so caught up in there's certain foods they can and cannot. For example, last week, my heartburn started to bother me. And the culprits are always hot sauce, ketchup, and Thai chili sauce, and tea. Anything that has like spice or tea in it tends to irritate my heartburn. So my doctor's always like, look, don't make a big drama out of this. Just cut those things out for a couple of weeks and then bring them back in lesser amounts. So I didn't know what to do because I almost always have roasted chicken and broccoli in a stir fry a couple nights a week. And I said, you know what? I'm going to throw some rice in that stir fry and then throw one egg in there, one whole egg. Now, some people might go, well, whole eggs aren't diet food. You have to eat egg whites. Or they might be like, well, you can't throw a whole egg in there because you already got the rice and the chicken. That one whole egg made that whole dish work without any type of heartburn-inducing sauce on it. And if I had locked myself into saying, well, I can't eat that egg in there, it's too many extra calories, it's too much fat, that would have hurt my ability to stay consistent with my diet. Because the thing that I came relying on, which this is certain type of spice, this certain type of sauce, I couldn't have for a temporary period of time. So I think people get too locked into, there's only certain foods I can and cannot eat. What understanding, if you open up the variety a little bit, if you open up the food preparation methods a little bit, you have all types of interesting, exciting things to do that are going to always be compliant in terms of ability to control calories, get in protein, and get in fiber.
Yeah.
All right. So that's my rant right there. So stop thinking in terms of off-limit foods and start thinking in terms of, all right, if I want to be a little creative, but still hold my principles of protein and fiber, how am I going to do that? And I got to tell you what, there is nobody in the business, Devon, get ready to pat yourself on the back. There is nobody in the business that I know who puts out as much content as consistently, explained as well in a way that is reasonable for most people to do than you do. I never see when you do those Instagram pages where you do the grocery runs that there's a rack of lamb, a Chateaubriand recipe, right? And then some fancy schmancy, I don't know. I don't know what fancy schmancy people do because I don't do it. Like your stuff is always bags of frozen vegetables, bags of potatoes, bags of chicken, right? Bags of, frozen broccoli, a box of rice, this and that. You do a lot of great stuff with some very simple alternatives, right? If you just watch Devon's page, people, I'll pimp her products for her. If you just watch her page, and there's somewhere is there a spot in your Instagram where you have those kind of recipes bookmarked kind of?
Well, I have the highlight, the story highlight. It's just food.
Yes.
So if people go on the page and click on the food story highlight, they can click through and see the very, very basic meals that I make.
Pork loin you use a lot of, correct? Like the seasoned pork loin. A lot of times you buy the stuff that's already seasoned.
Yeah. Well, I get the Publix always has the 2 for $12, the pork tenderloins that are already marinated.
Yes.
So I just always stock up on those when they have those.
Okay, boom, right there. We have options that we are not blessed with Publix in this area. I always said that if I was going to retire, I'd retire to Florida because there's Publix grocery stores. They are the premier grocery store in America. With that being said, that was me pimping Publix. Maybe we get a sponsorship deal. We'll see what happens. But I think that's all. And you'll see that she does so many different things without a necessarily massive variety of food. She just does it a little differently with spices and seasonings and cooking methods. So yeah, so that's what I wanted to say about the idea of the constant need for variety. Now, what about with training as far as yourself? How do you manage boredom in your own training, if that's even an issue?
I mean, I would say focusing on different things, like specializing in different things, like different muscle groups, that helps. So
and how often do you do that? How many weeks go by before you start specializing in a different muscle group?
I mean, I really did years of specializing in glutes.
Mm-hmm.
So, and then with now recently in the past couple of years, I've been changing it up maybe every 10 to 12 weeks.
Now, question, what was the motivation behind specializing on glutes? Did you fall off the toilet one day and you're like, I'm never going to let that happen again?
I think it was like maybe the novelty of the new exercise of the hip thrust that I hadn't done before. And it was kind of it was also like a social thing. Like at the gym, there were 2 other trainers that started doing the Brett Contreras Strong Curves program. So it's and then once I started doing it and started training that way, then that was what got the ball rolling with that. And then I just liked it. So I kept doing it.
So maybe we can go in a little detail. What was it about the hip thrust exercise? Because that was a new, exciting thing. I was doing that stuff for decades with body weight, single leg glute bridges with a band to help kind of correct certain imbalances. But I had never put a barbell on someone's hips and tried to progressively overload the exercise like he had invented. What was it about that exercise that let you know it just wasn't another kind of novelty in the wind, right? Because you see that all the time, gyms, all these new exercises come up. Why did that one stick, you think?
Because it was so foundational. And like, once I got stronger in that, my squats got stronger, my deadlifts got stronger.
How about your glutes? Did they grow?
They did.
So no more falling off the toilet, which is very motivational. I know
Yeah,
that.
so my glutes were started to get more developed. I was stronger in other bigger movements. I think just realizing how fundamental strengthening the hips are, as the hips are the platform for the spine, and how it's just so foundational. It was almost like making sure I was doing the fundamental things really just helped everything else get better.
Well, it's interesting you bring that up, because one time I had saw a study that was done on people. I think it was Americans versus Europeans. This was a while ago. Now the Europeans are as screwed up as we are. But they showed that when the European men entered a room, their hips entered the room first. And when the American men entered the room, their chest entered the room first. And I see this all the time in the gym. It's the downside of the seated workplace environment. People are being driven by their arms, shoulders, and necks, and not by their core and glutes, right? So if you think about that, when they walk into a room, if you're being driven by your arms and shoulders, you're going to lead into a room like this. But, and no one throw up on this one, I'm just going to show you a little Shank in shorts look here. If you think about it, if you've got active, strong glutes and active, strong hips, when you walk into a room, and these are the primary drivers, I actually kind of like that a little too much. When you drive through the room, you're going to drive through with your hips, right? When you're thinking like an athlete does, when you're driving through your core and through your pelvis, you're going to walk, right? You're not going to walk like this. You're not Ed Grimley, right? But you're going to be driven through your pelvis. Whereas people who have very dormant, weak, flabby, soft, I don't know what other words I can say, glutes, right? Basically, they're the Vladimir Putin of glutes, right? They're completely lost all perspective. What happens is they enter a room like this and they walk like that, okay? So you want to make sure, the reason why exercising a hip thrust or a barbell glute bridge is so important is it gets people to use their hips. And I wish people would do that when they're walking down Main Street and they walk past a window of a building, or they're walking around the house. See how you're walking. And I will promise you that I see this in the gym all the time. People are walking around and they're walking at like an angle like this, right? They're not using their hips to drive their movement like the human body was designed, right? Someone once said to me, well, what's the whole purpose of having glutes? I said, if you didn't have glutes, you'd walk around like this all day, right? Because they're massive anti-gravity muscles. When they contract, they lift you up, right? So I noticed that in your training, how much adding that exercise in was such an evolution. And if you're going by the shirt, the glute bridges would be one exercise for back of the thigh. All right, so just staying consistent with our message. All right, that's awesome. What else, Devon, what else did you want to talk about? Because I think we've dominated the boredom part of it, right? You found the new exercise, you found something to be exciting with, and you were progressive and you were consistent with it. What, is there anything else you want to talk about this boredom topic, or we want to move on to other things?
Well, I think just to sum up the boredom topic, for people who are beginners, if you're bored, it's probably because you're not making progress. If you're not making progress, you're probably either not being consistent or you're not repeating the same things over and over again enough and chasing strength. And then to sum up for the intermediate people, just having the realization that it is okay to not be increasing weight and reps every week, or having to constantly switch up your food, like doing the same exercises and kind of like plateauing a little bit strength wise. And then as far as in the kitchen, eating a lot of the same things, that's okay too. So just really having permission to kind of be in this almost like maintenance phase before getting to the next level.
Here's my question. Why do you think it is that eating similar foods all the time is such, I'm going to come out and say this, and I know because we've discussed this in the past. Why is eating the same foods all the time, most of the time, seem to be such a consistently present thing in people who are successful with their diets? Like, we'd expect the exact opposite, because we think boredom is such a big deal. We'd expect people who are successful on their diets to be eating massive varieties of different foods, you know, of all different colors of the rainbow. And yet we don't find that very often. We may find they may use different permutations of it involving sauces or preparation methods, but there's not necessarily a ton of variety. Why do you think that that is such a successful characteristic of a lot of successful diets?
A couple reasons. I think one, just having a high degree of predictability in your diet makes it easier. Like, you know how you're going to feel after a meal. You like a certain meal, and it's going to be satisfying to you when you have that certain meal. And then I think the other thing is the more variety and new things that you have in your diet, like the more exciting it is, it increases the appetite and it can just make you want to eat more. Whereas eating the same things, not having to eat meals that you're like, you don't have to be like sick of eating the same thing, but just eating the same things can kind of take away that extra appetite you might get from novelty foods.
Okay. I think another thing is I think dieting can be very anxiety provoking. And what I mean by that is, and I've had this discussion before also, is that you go to the grocery store, you go to the hardware store, excuse me, and you see food in the hardware store. Right now, I've said this, there should be nothing in the hardware store that you can eat that won't either A, break your teeth, or B, force you to call poison control. And yet when you go to Home Depot and you go to check out, there literally are candy bars, beef jerky, soda, chips, and cookie at freaking Home Depot. Why they do it? Because they know it makes them money. Because people are checking out and they go, I need to have something to eat. And they grab it, and every one of those adds up, right? Every extra dollar adds up for all the people that walk through there. Food is everywhere. It's in every message. It's in every video. I one time asked a client to go 5 minutes of having a discussion without talking about food. And it was like, hubbada, 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 hubbada. Like they could literally, everything in their life revolved around eating. Yeah. And when you start trying to change that, it promotes massive amounts of anxiety, not only within the individual who's trying to change things, but the fact that they're just constantly being berated by food messages all the time. And one of the things I know, because as you could guess, I'm a very anxious guy. I tend to like to watch a lot of the same movies, eat a lot of the same foods, follow the same routines, wear the same clothes, because there's a certain degree of predictability, right? When you put me in the same environments doing the same things all the time, and I know this with the animal shelter, a lot of times we try to match up certain people with certain dogs, because for the dogs, it's very anxiety provoking to have constantly having different people coming in and out on, in their space when they're already stressed up enough with all these other dogs barking around them. I noticed that consistency is a great way to manage anxiety, right? Now, you don't want to have a limited life. You never want to not leave the house, right? Every now and then I have to wear like a green shirt, right? Even though all my other shirts are black and white. But the reality is that when you cut out that variety, you create predictability. And predictability, while its downside is boredom, its upside is the management of anxiety. Right. The Chinese, and this is going to lead to my next point. The Chinese used to say, may you live in interesting times. That was actually a curse, not a blessing. Right. Because interesting times usually means something terrible is going on right now. And that was another thing. A client of mine had once done work in China, and it was very interesting because they were in some remote village and they had access to as much food as they wanted, but it was the same damn rice dishes over and over and over again. And he said by the end of the trip, they had lost weight. And I said, why? Is because the people are impoverished and they have enough food? And he said, no, we had access to plenty of food. We just didn't have the variety that you typically see in the United States. Like you go in the U.S. grocery store and you just look at salad dressings and the variety, it's almost paralyzing. Unless you know exactly what you want, you could literally be in the salad dressing aisle for like hours, just trying to figure out all the different types of salad dressing that exist. So I find that type of consistency tends to be correlated and to a degree, a causative factor of success in diet because of its ability to manage anxiety, not only within the individual, but the fact that they're surrounded in a world that's trying to tell them to do the exact opposite all the time. Right? So that's just something I noticed with that. And again, talking to that guy who had done the research in a foreign country, in an area of a foreign country where it didn't have the variety, he knows he just didn't want to eat as much because it was basically the same things over and over again. Now, the problem is we have other options in this country, so it's a little bit more of a lot more of a challenge. But you can kind of create your own little world sometimes, and you're going to have to when you're dieting, right? We know we can do this, right? If you went and paid attention to every piece of stimulus that was thrown your way, your head would explode. Right, New York City alone, you'd have a bunch of like decapitated people walking around because there's so much stimulation out there. So that's why you see people in New York, they're always like this, right? Because if they start taking in everything around them, their systems are going to break down. So it's the same thing with kind of dieting. If you can have consistent foods, consistent schedule, if you can, and they say embrace the suck. Well, if you can embrace the boredom, it'll go a long way to help managing that anxiety that is brought upon by a world and an economy that's not going anywhere. Right? So much of our economy is based around foods. I mean, do you think that would happen to Frito-Lay right now if they cut out all snack foods? Right? If they just say, snacking is really not a good idea. Like, you really don't need those little snack packs of potato chips. You're not going to die without them. I think their business model would I don't know, maybe talking out of my economic ass right now, but I think it would definitely injure their bottom line. Right? There's a reason why these fast food companies, it's not like in the 80s where they only offer a hamburger or a cheeseburger. Right? If you look at the menu for McDonald's, when I grew up, there was like 5 things. Now there's all types of variety of things because they know that's what sells. And sometimes you got to create your own little world. And a big part of that is managing the anxiety of living in a food-driven world by limiting the amount of things that you let into your world to make it much more manageable and feasible, I guess.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. We have 7 minutes and 43 seconds. So people always say when I do these videos, I want to hear more of what Devon has to say. I can listen to you rant and rave all week long in your own videos. So is there anything Devon wants to leave us with that something's been mulling over in her head? If we had a Devon soapbox, is there something you want to share with the audience?
Well, I think something actionable that people can take from the food repetition and having a lot of the same things is if they would come up with 3 to 5 staple meals that they know they like, that have protein, that have fiber.
Not actual staples. No, we're not. No paper clips, right? No push pins.
No.
Sorry.
So like coming up with those meals that they know they like, that they can repeat. And then
you have staple meals, Devon?
I do.
What are some of your staple meals?
What did I had today? I had the Cajun chicken thighs, quinoa, and some roasted vegetables, or chicken breast, steam in a bag, broccoli, potatoes. I mean, I kind of just cook the separate ingredients and then mix and match them. So
okay.
like carbs, like potatoes, rice, quinoa, and then within potatoes, there's like all different, there's sweet potatoes, purple potatoes, red potatoes, like there's all different kinds. And then meats, it's been like pork tenderloin, chicken breast, chicken thighs, beef, bison, and then vegetables like zucchini, green beans, broccoli. And then it's like, you have all those options, pick 2 of each every week, mix and match them. And that gives you that degree of predictability and repetition, but also enough variety to not be like sick of, you're not like 7 days in a row eating the exact same thing.
That's huge. Now, do you use any specific types of seasonings or sauces? Because I know our manager, my soon-to-be former manager, because now it's been made public that Kenny Tarr is indeed moving to Colorado. You didn't know that?
I did not know that.
Now the people in the great state of Florida know this also. Kenny Tarr would do the same thing. He'd have like a bunch of broccoli, a bunch of potatoes, a bunch of rice, a bunch of sweet potatoes, and it varied every week, right? Mm-hmm. But he would just basically throw them in a plate, and he'd have this variety of sauces that he used. So he used those basically as a palette, and then used these variety of low-calorie sauces to season the foods. Are there any seasonings or sauces that you like to use in this kind of potpourri of different staple foods that give it a little bit of punch?
Hot sauce, which there's so many different kinds of hot sauce. And then seasonings, there's one umami that I found recently. It's basically mushrooms.
Put it in the show notes. We'll figure it out. The name is umami.
Umami.
Okay.
And then the Cajun seasoning, that's another good one. And then, or I'll just do like salt and pepper, like simple. I would say those are my go-tos recently.
And with your clients, have your clients come up with any specific staple meals? And again, we mean staple as consistent foods, not eating office equipment. Have your clients come up with any staple meals that you've said, wow, that's a really great idea? Because obviously those pre-marinated pork loins, right? I remember one time I was talking to a guy at the Chinese restaurant, and he said, what they usually do is they'll cook their meats in sauces, and then they'll put it on the bed of rice and vegetables and allow the meats to flavor not only the natural juices in the meats, but the marinade and the sauces. They'll use that to season things like broccoli and potatoes and rice, which may be a little bit more bland. Have your clients come up with any type of staple meals that they like?
Yeah, well, one of my clients, she'll make like a vegetable soup at the beginning of the week and then have it for a couple days and then have it with like rotisserie chicken and like potatoes or something like that. And or just like coming up with like a go-to smoothie to start the day, to get in the protein and fiber and micronutrients. Or another client does like, she'll get the Jimmy Dean breakfast sandwiches with the turkey sausage and she'll just leave them in the freezer at work. So then when she goes into work, she doesn't have to worry about breakfast. She'll just go heat one of those up. I would say those are some things
I think it's important in saying closing is don't leave anything off the table. I know there's a belief that people should shop the perimeter of the grocery store and never the aisles. I know there's this anti-processed food attitude that's out there. You know, the problem with most processed foods is they tend to be incredibly calorie dense per gram compared to other foods. You know, if you have like a set measurement of the food, it tends to be more calorically dense. And it tends to be way more digestible, right? Because it's already processed to a degree. So people tend to eat more of it. But there are a lot of options in your freezer aisle. Fit kitchen meals are an example. There's a thing, I think it's Bird's Eye makes, they're called sheet meals, right? That already have protein, you know, potatoes and vegetables built into them that you can just kind of put in the oven for 25 minutes. And next thing you know, you got a meal for 2 or 3 people. Yeah. Use all your options, right? If you look at a lot of these like smart calorie frozen dinners, they're not made in some magical calorie laboratory. The portions are like that big, right? It's like, here, have a hamburger, but it's like that big. It's not a Five Guys burger, right? Which could have floated half the victims of the Titanic off in, right? That's so huge. That was terrible. It's too soon to be making Titanic jokes. I apologize. At this late in the video, I'm hurting for analogies. But put all cards on the table. If it's got some protein, it's got some fiber, you can control your intake of it, and it helps you with variety and flavor. It's all good.
Right.
Right. So we have a minute left. Is there anything you want to talk about? Anything you want to tell people about? Devon's got going down the pipe, anything like that?
Well, I wanted to kind of give it, not an analogy, but kind of like a visual for what you were talking about to not take things off the table. So like thinking of like a Venn diagram as like the one circle is optimal and the other circle is practical, and then making those overlap. So in order to be consistent, you're going to have to be like in the middle of those.
What's the one circle say again?
So optimal and practical. And it's like, how can you make those circles overlap? And in the middle, that's where you're probably going to find like your frozen meals, I mean, you can apply this principle to anything, but if we're talking specifically for diet, like that's like your rotisserie chicken or your frozen vegetables. And people are like, oh, well, if I'm not making my food from scratch, it's bad. It's like
20 seconds, Devon, get them.
Well, it's just like you have to be realistic enough to be consistent. Like that's really what it's going to.
That's awesome. Let's leave it there. Let's be realistic enough to be consistent. Remember, you like these videos, you enjoy these videos, like, subscribe. I'll put all the links in the show notes. We will see you people in a week or 2 weeks, whatever it takes. Thank you, Devon.